In the last year and a half, we saw a lot of injustice going on in the world. We saw Palestine's ongoing genocide, but we wanted to touch on four silent genocides going on, and it's Congo, Libya, Sudan, and the Uyghur Muslims. So we're gonna dive into Congo. Congo's war, what started it was one, power, and the natural resources that Congo has. A lot of people don't know this, but if Congo was actually stable in a country like America and all the powerful countries in the world, it would be number one with wealth because of the natural resources they hold. So Congo is also very complicated because there's a lot of militas going around, right? There's over 100 militas in Congo. So it's a very hard situation to understand for people because it has a lot of complex things because of all the militas trying to fight and gain control of the country.
A lot of independent actors.
Yes. So the resources that Congo holds that are very rich and popular are gold, colta, cobalt, and copper. Cobalt is essential right now because our phones, our cameras, our cars, and everything like that, anything tech related needs cobalt.
Especially EVs, right?
Yes, yeah. Electric cars is a big thing as well. So with cobalt being more in demand by these tech companies, it's harder for the people in Congo because they are the ones who are mining these materials unhumanely, right? They don't have the proper equipment to deal with these materials safely. So a lot of them are getting sick and dying and all that stuff from getting these materials. Which leads me to my point is these companies, these trillion-dollar companies, billions of dollars, almost trillions of dollars in market cap on the market, but yet they can't afford to source these materials humanely in an ethical way so it doesn't put other people at risk and paying. They don't even get a proper wage. I mean, these people are still starving and things like that.
Yeah, they're using their bare hands too. I've seen videos of that. But the thing with the CEOs and these policies that they enact, I read this report. It was basically diving into the disconnect between these policies, companies that project themselves as pro human rights. And so if a company enacts, a CEO at the corporate level enacts these policies for his distributors, his miners, those policies won't necessarily be implemented, right? It'll be a check in the box stateside at headquarters at a corporate level. But oftentimes these executives, they won't visit the country. So they won't see these policies actually be enforced.
So they have someone from that country telling them, hey, this is done this way, this and that, without them actually checking to see if it's done in an ethical way.
Yeah, and there's a disconnect between the communications, right, of what you want to happen versus what is actually happening, right? So you may say, it's like, that game Telephone, where it starts with one thing but ends with something else. So there's always that disconnect. I'm not saying that they're innocent of everything or of certain things, but they're just so out of the loop of what's happening with their mining process, their industrial process, that they just don't even know. At certain points they might not even know what is actually happening, and it really leads to the point, do they care? How ethical are they? Because if they enact these policies, they can say, hey, look to our consumers in the West, in established countries, hey, we did this, we are pro-human right, but is it actually happening?
I still think they know, because people know about Congo, people know about it, but it's just not a lot. I don't know how to describe it. It's still known to the point where they might know about it, right?
Yeah.
But moving on, so there's different militas in Congo. Like I said, the main one is M23, which is March 23. That's what it stands for, because it represents a peace treaty signed by the DRC in 2019. However, in 2012, the M23 launched an offensive because they accused the DRC president of violating the agreement, which is fueling more war. The M23, they're mainly fighting the UN peacemakers and the Congo government for power right now. Those are the kind of main components of who's fighting who, right? The UN has been trying to get peace in that country
Mm-hmm.
for over 2 decades now have been unsuccessful. So with this being over 2 decades, right? I said 30 years. There's a lot of humanitarian crises going on in Congo, right? There was a guy who actually set himself on fire and posted it on the internet to raise more awareness of what is going on in Congo, right? Because it's not being talked about enough, right?
Yeah.
150,000 people have been displaced since February 2024, right? We're in February 25, so that's
Yeah.
almost a year ago, right? And 7 million have been displaced inside the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of people leaving their towns and going to a different town and everything, right? More than 25 million is facing food insecurity, right?
Yeah. Stuff.
And a lot of them are, with this, like, the ongoing war and everything,
Yeah.
they don't have proper health care. So a lot of diseases are on an outbreak right now. A lot of people are getting sick, and they don't have the proper medicine/tools to deal with the diseases that these innocent people have. And recently, the M23 launched an offensive in Eastern DRC, which is Democratic Republic of Congo, right? And this actually broke one of the ceasefires, and they took over a town called Goma. This was just 2 days ago, and it's a mining town as well.
Yeah.
Also, they launched a new offensive just days before the crisis summit, and it's at the two presidents, Felix and Paul.
I know with Goma, I know they're UN forces. They were killed in that town as well during those attacks. And I know that I remember reading about Goma that they're having like mass burials. I think it was like the 2,800 people. Like they're struggling to bury these people, and they're just getting thrown into mass graves. So it's slowly starting to fester into one of those, crises. So we have Libya as well. We mentioned that Libya is a very important state in the Pan-Africa region. It's the doorstep to Europe. If you look at a map, Europe is just across the water, basically across the pond or whatever you want to call it, across the ocean. And immigrants use this to kind of, funnel their way into Europe. And this creates a huge problem with human trafficking, sex trafficking, which is a big market in Libya right now. Libya has a population of 7.5 million people, and it's a country with the largest oil reserves. And we talk about Libya, you can't help but not mention Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled from 1969 to 2011, and his downfall started, or it happened in 2011 during the Arab Spring, when Arab leaders, dictators were dropping like flies. You had Egypt, you had Syria, you had all this other stuff happen. And his rule was like a dictator rule. He took out political opponents, anybody that would challenge his rule. He came into power through military coup, right? They overthrew that previous regime. I do want to point out though, like, I know the narrative always is negative, and I'm sure he did a lot of negative things. He did start the Great Man-Made River Project. This was a 3-phase project that transported water to the cities in Libya, to Tripoli, to Tobruk. And so Libya is a very desolate country. It's a desert, full-blown. So all their waters come from ancient aquifers, ancient fossil water that's in the ground. And before this project started, they were looking for oil during the big oil boom, and they happened upon these large quantities of water that were just untapped. So he did start this project in 3 phases. I think about 2/3, maybe 1/3 of it was complete. But this was the first time in Libya history where people were able to turn on the tap and get water, which is something we take for granted 100%. How many times are we guilty of like keeping the tap running while brushing our teeth, stuff like that?
The U.S. came and bombed the man-made water, right?
Yes.
Man-made river.
River project. Yeah, it's called the Man-Made River Project because it basically was transporting this water, but it was through pipes. And the U.S. did do airstrikes against Gaddafi for this, on this project, under the pretense of these sites were being used as launching grounds for terror operations. But they did stop these strikes because there was no grounds. The UN couldn't, nobody could find really evidence of this. But since his downfall, militia groups have taken over these sites as always. Another thing that, those conspiracies, I don't want to say conspiracy theorists, but Gaddafi was a big advocate for the unification of African leaders for the Pan-African region. So he was set. There was rumors, there was talks that he wanted to create Africa's first national bank, central bank, backed by the resources of Africa. Something finite. The US dollar isn't backed by gold anymore. We dropped that. So this would have been huge for the region. And so, people say this is one of the reasons that foreign interventions caused it to fall. So along with these random militia groups, two government bodies ended up taking hold of Libya. In the eastern region, you have the Libyan National Army, which is the militaristic group. They're based out of Tobruk. These guys are backed by Russia, by Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Egypt, and also Italy. Egypt backs them predominantly because they share a border, and Egypt doesn't want these extremists kind of pulling into Egypt. Such as the Muslim Brotherhood, right, is one of those organizations that Egypt sees as a terrorist organization. Is led by General Khalifa Haftar. He tried to take out the other political party in 2019, but he failed. The other political party, which is UN recognized, is the Government of National Accord, and it's housed in Tripoli, where Haftar tried to take over. These guys are backed by France, backed by Qatar and Turkey as well. So Turkey backs them because they want drilling rights in the Mediterranean, because Libya has an oil reserve and there's plenty of oil to go around in that country that hasn't even been tapped. And Turkey also backs them because they share the same, I want to say, idealist political framework of a political Islamic party. So, Turkey kind of, I guess, Erdogan prides themselves of being that Muslim leader where he's able to do democratic policies, but also advocate for like Muslim leadership or Muslim rulership. And so the National Accord, the Government of National Accord, which is backed by Turkey, is led by Prime Minister Fayez al-Shajjar. And at this point in the conflict in Libya, it's at a stalemate, right? You have the country divided in half, with the militaristic National Army Party ruling the east, and then the Government of National Accord ruling in the west. And so it really leaves the Libyan people in the middle, in in the unknown, which is a common theme in all these places that we're talking about. The people are caught up in the middle. They don't know where their future is headed. They don't know which party is actually trying to, better their lives instead of just trying to power grab and land grab. And it's interesting because the Libyan people did overthrow, whether you want to say people meddled in that affair, whether the US caused it or some other country caused it, the Libyan people did overthrow Gaddafi. So the question remains, can they unite and overthrow these two different parties and maybe come up with a singular government for the unification of Libya?
The women and children protesting.
Yeah.
Are they being oppressed? Is the government being mad at them for protesting and killing them and things like that, attacking them back?
It's not to the extent you see elsewhere. And these protests aren't massive, they're kind of on a small scale, but it sets the foundation, it sets the building blocks of what can come next, right? Can they move past these little protests? Can they start, maybe taking over the country for themselves? But they aren't really necessarily being oppressed. There are a lot of outside, as I mentioned, Turkey, France, UK, Egypt. There are a lot of foreign intervention. And that's one of the main grievances of these mothers, the Libyan people, that, who's fighting for Libya? Who's fighting for them? Who's in it for Libya? Because it seems like everybody's just trying to grab a piece of Libya for themselves, benefit off the oil reserves, but not for them.
So next is Sudan, right? Sudan is famous for coups in that country. And there's North and South Sudan. And right now there's two parties fighting, right? The SAF and the RSF, right?
Yeah.
In 2019, the dictator Bashir got overthrown by them, right? By RSF, the leaders of RSF right now, and SAF.
Yeah, they overthrew them together.
Yes. They overthrew the old president together, and what they say, they promised the Sudanese people, hey, we're gonna make this like a great country again. We're gonna turn this around. We're for you guys, this and that.
Mm-hmm.
But guess what ended up happening? It's the power struggle, right? They started fighting each other for power.
Yeah.
So this is really a big deal because they publicly said to the people, like, hey, we're not going to be like this guy. We're going to be much better, this and that. But they turn around and break their promise.
Yeah.
Plus, getting the innocent people caught in the crossfire, right?
Common theme.
So the SAF is led by Abdul Fattah. That's the Sudanese Armed Forces. The RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, that's led by Muhammad Hamdan, right? And the regional players right now is mainly UAE. The UAE is funding on both sides. They're funding the RSF and the SAF, right? So they're complicit in this because it's not like they're like, hey, let's back this group because this group is for freedom, this and that.
Mm-hmm.
But they're kind of playing two sides of the swords. Like, let me get involved in both of them because my interest is strong in this country.
So they win either way.
Exactly.
While Sudanese people die at their hands, they win either way.
Right. They have a lot of blood on their hands,
Yeah.
basically. But that raises the question, why is the UAE so invested in Sudan?
Yeah.
Why do they want a lot of interest in Sudan, right?
I know they're definitely profiting from the weapon sales. That's always a given from my personal knowledge of that.
So is it that, or is it something that we'll have to wait in the future to find out, right? See if a side wins and if there's like a breaking news saying something's happening involving them with the UAE, right?
Yeah, well, UAE wins regardless,
Right.
you know. So they kind of get away with that a lot.
The U.S. and Saudi, they're involved also, but they're involved as mediators. They're the one that are trying to get peace into this conflict going on right now. So the UAE also, they backed the old president Bashir, right? And the RSF was formed in 2013. So the SAF, they are supported by Egypt, Qatar, and Iran.
Sudan Armed Forces.
Sudanese armed
Forces, yeah, SAF.
Yeah. So the death toll right now, as far as the humanitarian standpoint of Sudan right now, 12,000 plus killed since 2023.
12,000?
Yeah. But the thing is, the number is likely a lot higher, as we can imagine, right? 8+ million people displaced in the country, which is the largest displacement crisis going on in the world right now.
Yeah, it's a huge humanitarian crisis.
And a lot of them, they're very hungry as well. They're starving. They don't have enough money to buy meals and everything like that.
Yeah,
right.
It's a famine.
And that's millions of them. It's not like thousands, right?
Yeah.
It's millions of them. So it's a big thing that's not being talked about enough right now.
Yeah.
So that leads me to the RSF and the sexual violence that they're being accused of, which is a widespread, right? It's not just like they're doing it to a couple people. It's a lot of people that they're raping and things like that. And a lot of them are women and girls as young as 12 years old.
Yeah.
Being exposed to this, right? And that's something that the UAE backs, which is crazy. And there's been ethically motivated attacks in West Darfur
region, yeah.
Yeah. And with any crisis like this, the healthcare systems aren't really good, right? Hospitals are being bombed, diseases are being spread. The hospitals and the doctors don't have the proper equipment to help the Sudanese people who are really sick right now. And like a lot of them might need surgeries, but they don't have the proper stuff to do things right now.
Yeah. Going back to the, what RSF is doing, they're basically raping and pillaging as they go. I know recently, about a few months ago, one of their commanding generals, one of their lieutenants from the Darfur region defected. So he turned himself into the Sudanese armed forces. And because of this, the RSF, they basically deliberately committed rape in the region where this commanding general was from. So they use rape as a weapon, as like, this is what happens when you defect. Right. So they're definitely...
They're evil people.
Yeah, they definitely need to get taken out.
So what's sad is that this war isn't Islamically war, right?
Yeah.
It's not following the Islamic principles.
That's not a thing, though. to
Right.
follow the Islamic principle with these organizations,
Yeah, that's true.
these terrorist
True.
groups.
I mean, I guess I was thinking just because like
They're
Sudanese
Muslims.
people, they're Muslims, right?
Yeah.
It's like kind of like, yeah,
Yeah, they're both Muslims,
yeah,
but none of them are like practicing in the sense of
following the rules of war.
yeah
Yeah,
or anything. And I wouldn't say anything, but
yeah.
so the Uyghur Muslims, it's very interesting because they kind of differ from what we talked about with Sudan, with Libya, with Congo, because there's really a systematic form of oppression going on. And when you think of the Uyghurs, you can almost compare their situation to something very popular, another form of oppression, another form of genocide that's pretty popular right now.
Is it Israel and Palestine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Before you dive into this, I want to say one thing.
yeah.
Adidas is complicit to this.
Really?
They are using the Uyghur Muslims
Uh-huh.
as the child slaves and everything like that to make their merchandise. So they're officially on my boycott list, which hurts because like I buy a lot of Adidas. Like
Yeah.
I used to buy them a lot, but now no longer.
I didn't know that about Adidas. Really, that's interesting. Because you usually hear about Nike and China sweatshops type
Right,
thing,
right.
but interesting. So the Uyghur Muslims, they reside in Xinjiang province, which is from the Chinese perspective, it's known as, it translates to Xinjiang province, it translates to New Frontier. Now, a lot of Uyghur Muslims refer to this region to East Turkestan. And when you look at a map of China, this region is on the top left for visual representation. And they are a predominantly Turkic ethnic speaking group, or Turkic speaking ethnic group. And the Xinjiang province, it has been occupied by China since 1949, so post World War II era. And China targets, one of the main reasons for targeting the Uyghur Muslims is because they believe they hold extremist and separatist values that goes against China's integrity and political narrative.
So the Uyghur Muslims are basically being punished for two reasons. One, because they hold Islam, and two, because they hold a different race than the rest of the Chinese people.
Yeah, exactly. And so, with the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, their party prioritized ideological control of their national identity. They want they wanted uniform look, essentially, and for social and religious control over its people. They're commies, basically. And under Xi Jinping, the Communist Party in this region, they have destroyed over 5,000 ancient mosques.
And you know what's interesting? I've seen a lot of reels on Instagram about Chinese Muslims, and they all act like it's perfectly fine to be Muslim in China.
That's why I don't trust them.
But like I've seen a lot of them,
Uh,
and this guy, I can't remember which account it
The
was,
food
but
guy?
this guy I follow, he made a post about it. He was like, "Don't be fooled by these reels that you're seeing on Instagram about the Muslims in China. It looks like they have a good life and everything,
Yeah.
but they really don't."
That's why I don't trust those things, like China controls the news network. They control that every narrative over there is pretty heavily controlled. It's a police state. It's heavily surveillance.
Mm-hmm.
They have facial recognition, right? They use AI to track you. For the Uyghur Muslims particularly, they make them download an app so it can see their text messages. It can GPS locate them and stuff like that. So it's a police state, right? For the Uyghur Muslims particularly. In addition to destroying almost over 5,000 ancient mosques, China, that region has a deep history of Islam. You look at the Mongols, they were in this region, and all these Turkic groups. So in addition to destroying the mosque, they've arrested imams, so they can't really preach Islam. They can't give out lectures. They can't do khutbahs, etc., etc. They banned wearing the hijab as well. We talk about France and Europe countries. China's along the same lines of that.
And that doesn't get talked about much either, because I didn't know that about China. But also I know that they force feed them pork and alcohol
Alcohol,
as
yeah.
well. Yeah.
I think this one interview I was listening to, the man said that, like, they forced him to eat dumplings, and he asked if the dumplings were haram or halal, and he knew it was pork in it, because dumplings, they use meat in dumplings, and so they force fed him dumplings. And so with all these control factors implemented, there's also a systematic way of arresting and putting the Uyghur Muslims into concentration camps. China labels these concentration camps as re-educational training camps, right? Think of it, they're basically trying to say this is a college, or this is a formal school, but in reality it's indoctrinating these Uyghur Muslims into the communist narrative that, China's on top, not your religion, because that's what makes Islam so dangerous to them. It doesn't really put the party at top. It puts the religion.
Yeah.
It releases the shackles of their control. So they have thrown about 1.3 million people into these concentration camps. And in these camps, there's also massive rape going on. What's interesting is there's Chinese workers in these camps. And I was listening to this one interview, and the lady, she was traumatized as well. And, we can't really cast stones on her, for we don't know her situation completely. But she was involved in this rape of this particular sister.
Wow.
And she basically she stripped the sister, of her clothes and tied her up while 3 men came to rape this sister. So it's systematic rape going on in these prisons as well. And it's just so much stuff. It's not talked about. And I know recently we said this can kind of compare to what's happening to, our brothers and sisters in Gaza and Palestine. I know China, they pushed out, obviously you hear Trump talking about relocating the people of Gaza elsewhere. And China, just to, be like, we're above the U.S., they released a statement. I think it was their foreign minister or whoever said, oh, the U.S. or Trump's demand of relocating the people of Gaza is unethical or unmoral. They released some statement against Trump's rhetoric. And I saw a lot of Muslims post that, which I don't agree with, right? It seems like I talked about in our other episodes of Western Muslims, they just jump headline to headline, right? They don't dive too deep into the issue. China doesn't care about the people of Gaza. They don't. They're doing their own same genocide similar to what's going on over there to the Uyghur Muslims. And the Uyghur Muslims are they really got swept under the rug. It's happening quietly, because even with Gaza, they have phones, they can't, it's hard to take away the phone over there, although it is controlled, their internet, their fuel, everything's controlled. But when you're living inside a police state where everything is monitored, you're tracked.
You can't record. You can't do anything.
Your phone is
That's why it's not well known.
It's not. And there are other countries, Muslim countries, that are, I don't want to say complicit, but they're kind of aware, but they shun it away. So Turkey and Saudi Arabia, especially Turkey, historically, they have been big advocates of the Uyghur Muslims. They kind of, been harping on China, a lack of better terms, and Saudi Arabia as well. But because of the Belt Road Initiative, they kind of eased off the tension for economic prosperity. So that was an interesting thing that I thought I found out about Turkey and Saudi Arabia.
So what can we do to help our brothers and sisters everywhere, right? I mean, these are just 4 others. I'm sure there's a lot more that we're not even aware of. My message is, Ramadan's coming. Lock in. Allah says in the Quran, we will not change the state of people until they change themselves, right? So this is a part of us too. We have our duty to change ourselves, stop doing the bad, and do the good instead. And then the state of the people will change.
Yeah, inshallah. I just want to say, we really didn't do these topic justice. It's really, I said let's not rush it, but obviously we wanted to get this episode out. So like we didn't do these topic justice. Everybody needs to, especially Muslims, you guys need to go out and educate yourself about these topics, right? A lot of Western Muslims, you guys really, I'm included as a Western Muslim, but a lot of them blindly jump to headlines like this situation with China advocating quote unquote for Gaza, right? Do they really care about the people of Gaza when they're doing the same thing to the Uyghur Muslims? Hell no. So we did not do these topics justice at all. I can't really say that enough. We as Muslims, we need to educate ourselves about these issues so we can really advocate for ourselves, right? And just keep researching and talking about it in whatever form, way, shape, or form that you can do in your ability. And at the end of it, so as some said that the dua is the weapon of the believers, right? So make dua for our brothers and sisters all over the globe.